Keith Shubert is a puppeteer, puppet festival director, toy maker, and champion of all things puppetry. Keith also performs as Toybox, America's favorite cartoon witch, whose unique brand of puppet entertainment is in high demand for puppet slams, shows, and festivals all across the country. I sat down with Keith to talk about his career and his thoughts on puppetry for this episode of Under the Puppet. You're listening to Saturday Morning Media. And now, back to our show. Welcome to the show that is preserving puppetry through the personal stories of professional puppeteers. My name is Grant Pachoco, and this is Under the Puppet. Well, I am super excited to welcome to Under the Puppet today the one, the only Keith Shubert. Keith, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show. This is very exciting.
Well, I have to say that the first time I saw you, I believe, was at the 2019 National Festival. That is the first time I saw you perform. And just instantly, I fell in love. I fell in love with America's favorite cartoon witch, Toybox. And I'm super excited to talk to you today about all of your creative work. But I always like to start these interviews by asking, do you remember your first exposure to puppetry, the first time you saw puppets?
Wait, before I say that, I just want to say 2019 Puppeteers of America Festival, I was also the chair of the artistic committee. So that's a very exciting festival. Was that your first P of A festival?
Yes, it was. I had been to regional festivals, but that was the first main one I've been to. Yeah.
Well, it makes me really happy that that was your first one, because I feel like your first national festival is always going to be your favorite, just for like the whole experience of like, oh, I'm here and all these people are together and we're all unified in a common cause, no matter what sort of divergent perspectives they come from. That is just, it's a really magical thing. And I worked hard on that festival to actually make it magical in several ways.
It was very magical.
Good. I'm glad. It just makes me happy when I hear people say stuff like, oh, that was my first national festival. I'm like, yes. Because I remember, I'll never forget my first national festival. It was when I met so many friends and community members that I had never met that now have become lifelong friends, for the last 20 years. And I see going in amazing places, and so I feel like going to the festivals is such an important and magical element of what we do.
Where was your first festival?
My first puppet festival was in 2000 in Chicago, which was the first Chicago festival. Now they've had that Chicago festival for 20 some years. But I think there was a break for a while around like mid 2000s. It went away for a little while, but now I think everyone knows since it's come back that it's just an incredible puppetry festival, and it has a reputation for presenting just amazing like international work. But yeah, my first festivals were 2000 that I just went to a couple shows. I think I saw like a Janie Geyser exhibit, which was really amazing, and was sort of like these shadow box tableaus that you walked around this gallery, and each sort of like a Lambi Lambi, but like more like Lambi Lambi versus toy theater kind of technique with storytelling. And it was really beautiful. And that's the only time I've ever seen her do a performance. So that was a special thing for me that I would never forget. And I think maybe there was like a Vietnamese water puppet show. And I was just like intrigued by like what that was and how that worked. So like I went to a couple things and then some of the film nights, but then that was sort of like the gateway for me after going to that festival, just like casually. I was like, next year, oh man, I'm so into it. So there was a course for a 2-week course at the Art Institute of Chicago, and it was taught by Blair Thomas. And so I met Blair in 2001, and I never had really met him. I had gone to Red Moon shows, in the 90s even, and those were always like so awesome. Like The Red Moon Theater shows in the 90s were like the best puppet shows of my life. Like just so cool and always different. And they did different stuff. Like they would have a winter pageant that included kids, and would be like a community sort of show. And then they had these amazing theatrical pieces that were always very dark and different from anything else happening. And so I was seeing that stuff in the 90s, but at that point I had no idea that like, oh, I could do this. I will be doing this someday. Like that was not even a concept. It was just like being a, college student in my 20s, going to the city, seeing a cool show, just like, yeah, the new Red Moon thing, that's going to be awesome and so weird. So I was aware of their work. And so then in 2001, I went to, I think, the first like big Chicago festival. Like for me, the 2001 was finding how to do it. And then by the second one, they had gotten tons of funding from the city, and it was just like everywhere. Like all the subway cars had posters up for it. You saw it everywhere. It was a big deal. They even had one show that was up for like a week or 2 weeks, and it was these people that were like living in the window display at Marshall Fields, and it was like a 24-hour immersive thing. Like you could just go. And so that was what was really fun being a part of that festival. You could just go to this window display, be like any time of the day, like what's going on over there? And there was a couple times we did, and it was pretty cool. And so that festival really, like from then on, I was like, I have to go to a puppet festival every year for the rest of my life. Like this is the best experience. And I pretty much succeeded, except for, of course, the years that we stayed in home at home for the entire time. So that was probably about 2 years of not going to puppet festivals. And I think a lot of the festivals were sort of restructuring within that time. Like, how do we do this again? How do we make this feasible and viable to communities? And even now, I think festivals are sort of trying to figure out how to reestablish themselves into the world in a successful way. And that's all like post COVID, like COVID sort of set things off, changed the way people experience the world. And so that has affected larger puppet festivals, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, probably 2001. So I was studying with Blair at a puppetry course at the Art Institute of Chicago. So there was like a week or a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks. I don't really remember, but there was a time period before the festival began that we had this really sort of intensive class that I think a lot of people in modern puppetry would correlate to like an O'Neill experience, where we just worked every single day with Blair in his studio. And and like those sort of intensive studies, there were some days where it was like, oh, this is going great, time's up, do you guys want to go? And we'd be like, no, we're in this, we're making this thing. And so sometimes it might go a little late, but it was really cool. Like we created this like really nice bond as a sort of family unit. And then after we had the course, we saw the festival together, and a lot of some of the course, I think there was like maybe 3 weeks that we were just with Blair, and then there was a section that we did workshops with all of the artists that were coming, and it was like an amazing list of people. Eric Bass from Sandglass, Hugo Inez, and incredible. There was this group from Argentina called El Periférico de Objetos that were amazing. And I've talked to people like, oh, have you ever heard of this? And like, they're like legends. And I only saw them once, but their show was like so cool, so powerful, very dark. And so we got to do a workshop with them, and just every group that was coming to the festival had like a little workshop or a longer workshop or whatever, or just a, meet and greet, a talk. Michael Montenegro, we met him, who's like incredible, just incredible. And like, I so value the experience of like seeing this cast of people at that early age. And it really like solidified any thoughts that I had of like where I want to go and what I want to do. I was like, oh man, I want to be like these people, you know. This is incredible. And I feel like I've succeeded in that, you know, in some ways. Like I saw this thing, I had the vision for how I wanted my life to go, and I kept doing it until it got there, you know.
Hmm.
And so for me, like that's really important when I teach and I work with young people of all ages, you know, children and teens, and then, you know, people in their 20s and 30s that are trying to become puppeteers. I work with all those people, and the main thing I tell all of them is like, how you do this is by not giving up. Like, that's it. That's the only, if you want to do it, you just don't give up. You keep doing it no matter if you have to work, you know, some crappy job, waiting tables or serving coffee or whatever. You have to do that job, but you also have to work on your puppetry in some way every day, you know. And I feel like I work on it every day. But sometimes that can be in different ways, you know. You can consider like working on your puppetry simply by doing what we're doing and like talking to your community, chatting online. Consider that work because it is. You're like, it's sort of like therapy. You're talking through like whatever aspect, whatever element. Like if you're producing a show and you're talking to your friend, like, oh, I'm having such a hard time with this venue. Yeah, well, what I do is this. Or it's like this deeply creative sort of conversation where like, oh, I have this idea for this thing and I want to represent it this way, but then I want it to morph into this and that represents this or whatever. You're sort of thinking out when you're talking to other people that understand those things, you know, because not everyone understands those things and you can't have those conversations with just anybody.
Right, I think that's a good promotion for festivals because that when you go to festivals, you meet those people, and with the way technology is now, you can, you and I can send a Facebook message back and forth to each other pretty easily. And
Yeah,
also local guilds and finding the people in your area who are doing that, things like you did when you were starting out.
exactly. Exactly. You know, and like what I'm saying is if you're young and you're trying to become a puppeteer, and maybe you're like working at a coffee shop and everything's clean and you took out the trash and there's no one in there and you're sitting on your phone, you know, if you're using that time to like look at puppetry and connect with the community, send you see some awesome video, send that person a message and be like, "Hey, I saw your thing. I loved that." You know, like that's how I became friends with Mario the Maker Magician, who's an incredible, like worldwide phenomenon and one of just the most amazing entertainers I've ever seen. And I saw his video online and like this was years ago. Now he's like blown up, but I just sent him a message and was like, "Hey, I'm a puppeteer. I live in Asheville, North Carolina. I saw your show. This video, this is amazing. I love it." You know, like, and told him, "You're doing puppetry in there," you know, and he was like, "No, I'm a magician." I'm like, "No, there's a lot of puppet stuff that you're doing, and the puppet people like this, you know." And so you know, that's the thing too, is like sometimes people don't even realize that they're doing puppetry and they are. And there is this sort of like, because of the state of the world and art, there is all these meshings of like fusion of different art, you know, and styles and performance where like, for example, there's this one female comedian who does this sort of flip book. Have you ever seen her?
Oh yeah, Beck Hill. Yeah, we're I
Yeah,
was trying to get
yes.
her on the show. She's awesome. Yeah,
That's puppetry, you know,
yeah.
and like I don't know if immediately she knew that or if she was just like, oh, I'm gonna do this thing because it's really clever and funny, and then did it, and then all the puppet people probably contact her and be like, oh, I love your puppet show. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm doing a puppet show, you know, and so same sort of thing with like Mario, who's essentially doing a magic show, but including puppetry in it. There's a lot of you know, and then you look at all the like big Broadway stuff now. All the most successful shows on Broadway have some giant puppet element to them, you know. And I don't know if the common like regular audience member fully realizes that like puppetry is so embedded in all of their culture and all of their daily life, which is crazy because then you get these people that experience it on that level. But then when you're like, hey, there's a puppet show in town, you should go to it, like a live puppet show, they're like, oh, I've never done that. Like, and then they come and they're like, yeah, I never thought that I could just do this. Like, yeah, it's a thing and it's happening in every town. Support your local puppeteer, go to their shows,
Yeah.
because they're doing them somewhere, whether it's on a street corner in front of a coffee shop or in a local theater or, puppet slams in some sort of nightclub or something like that. There's stuff happening and people should support it.
I agree. I agree. I wanted to ask you, I mean, we talked about, sort of around 2000 when you started working towards this, or getting the startings of working towards this goal. But at a younger age, were you, because you are a great performer on stage, were you performing like in elementary school and high school? Like, were you doing theater and stuff like that?
No, I mean in high school, probably like junior high, I really sort of embraced this rebel and deviant persona, and so was just really tuned out of like academics and was pursuing my own academics, which I thought were more valuable. My first puppet show was in sixth grade, and
Okay.
that experience really that solidified something into me right there. When we did that show and the way that our teacher used puppetry in the classroom as a teaching tool, I understood it and I thought it was really smart, even when I was like 12 years old, because I was like, okay, this is awesome because we're doing this thing, we're making this thing that's attached to this lesson. And so the entire time you're making the thing, you're thinking about the lesson to which it's attached. So you're working all through all of that mentally while you're building your object. And then you present the show, which is a big deal in itself. And like this whole like, oh, it's a production and everyone's watching, like this is awesome. But then you're left with a physical artifact that retains that memory of that whole exchange. And so when I was in sixth grade, I understood that and connected with it. So then I thought that I would be a teacher. And I went to college to be an elementary school teacher with the intention of using puppetry as a learning tool. And it was very important to me to do that. And I did that in, all of my practicums and student teaching and all of that, like I tried to interject puppetry into learning. And then when I graduated college, I got a job as a substitute teacher to like kind of go around, work with some different grade groups, go to different schools. And committing to a school to me just felt like it was like marriage. It was like once you commit to a school, then you have a group of kids, you fall in love with those kids and their personalities and these little people, and then they go to the next grade group and you have a new group of kids, but you still see the old kids that are now in a different grade. And so it creates this like everlasting loop where like you see the young kids and you start thinking like, oh, I notice you. I hope you're in my class, like, because you're great. You're going to be tons of fun. And it was just too much. And I sort of like examined that whole experience. And I was also doing like stop motion animation projects with my friends that incorporated puppetry a lot and other sort of like art projects. I've been a doll maker for the longest amount of time. Like that's sort of where I started was like just making physical anthropomorphic things as art objects, which is something that I've sort of always done my whole life. And I think for me, another thing is toys. Toys are a big part of where my sort of path and just playing with toys. And I always thought that I was good at it when I would play with like other kids in the neighborhood and stuff. I'd be like, oh yeah, we have a good storyline, but look, you can make him like walk. you can bend this guy and make him swim in this creek too. You can have him jump out of the parachute and look like he's doing it, not just like holding it in your hand, like, but like manipulating it and being like, oh, I'm falling, whatever. And those were other things that I was aware of. I recognize this. And so I've been a toy collector my entire life. Like I never stopped collecting toys, because that is a really big and important part of what I do. I think it's how I've always been. It wasn't like it was just connecting these experiences and like being, for example, a young child and watching like Ray Harryhausen movies and then seeing those scenes that were like so incredible and then later being like, oh, that was my favorite stuff when I was at a very early age, like 3 4 years old. That was the things that really had a psychological effect on me. Why was it? It was because of the puppetry. you know those were the things that drew me to it. And so, you know I think that puppetry is something that I've always done, and I never, even when I didn't realize I was doing it, I was still doing it. But definitely there was a time period in like middle school to like junior year in college. I think there was just this time period of like putting all that stuff away and focusing on like learning about other things and hanging out with my friends and going to concerts and stuff like that. And but also, comic books are also a big part of what I do and like how I process information and my lifestyle. So that was something that I never, since I was maybe 10 or 11, that I've always done that. I've always read comics. But the nice thing about comics is there's so much variety that I could shift. And I could find these things like, oh, now I'm going to go into like crime noir. Now I want to read all of the classics of like Crazy Cat and Prince Valiant or whatever. Now I want to do, just this like dark, weird metaphysical stuff. And now I want to do like true crime but then at some point be like, go back to the superheroes and be like, you know what? That was where I came in. I think Mad Magazine actually is where that was like for our generation, that was like the big gateway. So comics have also been something, and I realized that at a certain age, I always wanted to do comics, but I can draw okay. I can sketch out like a puppet that I want to make or whatever, or like play a drawing game and make something fun and weird, but I couldn't draw a comic, you know? And so I realized at some point, like, but I can make a puppet show, because in a puppet show, you don't have to show everything. And in fact, sometimes it's good not to show everything, And that's a critique that I've heard from my peers is like, I love how you just boil stuff down and don't show everything and only show the thing that is important or whatever. Sometimes I'll show everything, right? Because sometimes that's fun. But making pieces that, are just sort of simple and leave things open. It's cool that people understand and like recognize some of my approaches, because I think my approach by some people might be considered naive or like inferior even, of like, because a lot of my puppet slam pieces will be made of like really cheap materials, stuff that you have under your kitchen sink, and that is very intentional. Like I do that on purpose. Sometimes it's because of a time crunch. I'm like, oh, I need a new piece and it's tomorrow and I don't have an idea yet. I don't know. Oh, wait, what about this? Yeah, I'll just make that real quick. But also, it is intentional in that, like, I want people to come to my show and be like, oh, you just painted cardboard and moved it around, but you told this great story. I want to go home and do that. And like, great. That's why I did it that way. I want you to see that, go home, because I'm not going to be doing the puppet show forever. Sometimes I want to just sit and watch the puppet show. And every time I do, it's like such a treat. I feel like I'm working so much at like festivals and events that It's rare that I can actually like sit and absorb and relax and watch a show. It's always delightful, and I think that that rings out with audiences every time.
Excellent. Well, I know that the persona that you take on of Toybox is actually two personas. There's two different versions of Toybox. But can you talk a little bit about where this idea to create this? I don't know if I don't want to be insulting by calling him a character. I don't know the terminology you want to use, but where did you come up with the idea? Like, okay, I want to do puppets, but I want to have this, Toybox leading the audience through these pieces.
Well, I feel like what that comes out of is also a simultaneous love of clowning, storytelling, vaudeville, circus. And so I want to sort of incorporate those other traditions into what I'm doing because I do have a deep love and respect for those things as well. And so a lot of it is that. There's a lot of reasons. Some of it is because like I was saying, the characters help to facilitate this concept of like, I don't have to show that much because also I can lean on being this character on stage. And so I can develop this element of my performance and not have to physically make as many things. So there's an efficiency to the concept, and then there's like sort of personal magical concepts that are also involved in the characters. So I perform as Toybox the Clown, which is like my daytime character, and usually for children or all ages shows. And that is meant to be sort of this like eternal child type clown, someone that can always have fun and like be creative, spur of the moment, like, oh yeah, this is happening. What if we do this? And just, whatever, more random and childlike. And then I do Toybox the Witch, which is what I do majority of my time. More performances than anything else are done as Toybox the Witch. Even though I do different stuff, I do kid shows, I do like birthday party shows, outdoor street festivals, all kinds of stuff, and also make like linear puppet plays, like a 45-minute to an hour play. But the main thing that I do is play Toybox the Witch because it's accessible, it's modular, it's sort of like my puppet slam persona and character that specifically came out of hosting puppet slams. So I had been doing Toybox the Clown since 2006. And that was just sort of like I thought my thing, that I could just put on this costume, do puppet shows, do clown shows, be random, just hang out and play with kids, have adventures, play games, whatever. Just sort of like this universal imaginary friend type character. And I had been doing that. And then from doing puppet slams, I realized like, oh, I need to host and I need a fun way to host. And so around like 2010 and 11 to 12, that's when Toybox the Witch sort of like became developed and then a thing. And it turned into such a thing where like I did it and I didn't at first realize like, oh, this is going to be a character that people love and they want back. Like I thought it was just like, okay, for the next show, I'll think of a new host. That was fun. But it turned into such a like people loved it so much. They were like, you're going to do the next show like that, right? And I was like, yeah, okay, if that's what you want. And it came to the point where like now people will want me to host like the juggling festivals or like a magic conference or something like that. And I'm like, but I can't juggle, like I can't even throw up a thing. They're like, we don't care. Just put on the hat and the cape, come talk, say some funny stuff. So that's what has become great about it is that it is modular and it does plug into all of these different facets of variety entertainment. And so that's how I get a lot of gigs because, you know, there's it's hard to, especially if you live in a mid-size location, have a puppet show every weekend. unless you're touring or going to other towns. So if you're working locally, you got to plug into what's happening and what type of shows are happening. And so it's helped that way a lot. But I feel like having these sort of separate personas help me in my own personal life, having these sort of like clown personas that I can inhabit. And there's times I truly believe that there's this sort of magical property to that. Because there are times where I become these separate characters who are parts of my personality. And that's something important in clowning and that they teach in clowning is like when you develop your clown, it's you. It's just this sort of heightened or skewed view of you, but it's you. Be yourself, and that's going to ring true and it's going to connect with audiences. And so that's an important part of clowning. So, that's sort of part of being these two different toy boxes is like I can do that. I can be this sort of authentic version of myself and speak truths and do whatever I want. And because I've created this character, that's okay. But also it's powerful and it's just me, doing and saying these things. And I think that's why people connect with it so much because they see that and they recognize that, it's like Toybox is being honest with them, and I think that's the thing. Connecting with audiences, no matter what type of performer you are, is you have to do something that is from your heart and soul that will ring out to the crowd and that they can connect with. Because if you're trying to like, and I see a lot of this because I work with children's entertainers and whatnot, but like, oh, Frozen is the big movie right now, so we have to do Snow Queen. And it can be a beautiful show and it can be great, whatever. But sometimes some of those things are like lacking a level and depth in soul and connection where you're like, yeah, but you just did this because you knew it was going to sell. And it feels that way. Like, do a puppet show that is meaningful to yourself, that you want to see created and manipulated live in the world. That is always going to be more important, and that's always going to ring more true with your audience, and they'll recognize that, and connect to it. So those are things that are important to me, and so that is relative to, the toy box characters. And like for me, it's sort of like having these different personalities that I can plug into that allow me to be a truer version of myself, but also escape the things that are part of my everyday self that I don't want to deal with, and those could be several things, like giving myself these moments to manage my other actual existential problems, whatever they may be, about the state of the world or personal stuff, like how I wasted too much time building a thing that now I don't want to use or whatever, So having these characters sort of help me in being a truer version of myself and really interacting with the world in a genuine and unique way that's also fun. And so that's all sort of part of it.
Well, you mentioned that you are called upon a lot of times to host puppet slams and like you said, the juggling festivals or the magic conference or whatever it is. I would love to know, as someone who gets called on to host, what are your thoughts on what makes a good host or MC for an event like that?
That's a really good question. And I feel like that is also something that I think people don't always consider. Is like being an MC is an art form in itself. And there's so much craft and so much art that should be involved in the way that you do it. I feel like, some people think, oh, it's just my job to go up there and like say words off a card, make sure I say the proper introduction for the person, and like I'm here for this sort of utilitarian like job to like give information. And it's like, no, that's only part of your job. The other part of your job is to entertain the audience and to carry the show. Because I think if you're the MC of the show, you should go in with the mindset like, okay, I have a variety show here. And sometimes that variety show is a bunch of people that you don't know. You don't know if it's going to be good or bad. And so, as the MC going in, it is my job here to make sure that at least whatever I'm doing entertains this crowd for the entire show. So they leave happy, and that goes into this sort of thing of like, there's two types of performers. There's an entertainer and there's a performance artist, right? And the entertainer knows that it's their job to entertain people. People paid their money to sit in a space with you. So they're not only spending their money, but they're also spending their time. And you have to value and respect that and be like, I'm going to make sure that it's worth it for you. Maybe sometimes more than worth it. That's your ultimate goal. It's like, this is going to be the best $10 you ever spent. You're going to leave this like supercharged. You can do that as the MC, and having that sort of awareness of like, I'm here to entertain the crowd. I'm here to put on a show just in whatever I do. And I think that sort of separates the good MCs from the just doing the job MCs, and just doing the job's fine, but it depends on the show. And when you're working like late night club entertainment or like weird coffee houses, stuff like that, or art gallery spaces or whatever, that's what they're coming for. They're not just coming for someone to read off a card, they're coming for a show, and you got to give them a show. So I think that is important and part of my approach, and why people want me to host stuff all the time is like, they know at this point it'll be a draw. People will be like, oh, whatever this thing is, the Improv Comedy Festival hosted by Toybox, I'm going to that. And that's what's great about the character, is that I work a lot of burlesque shows. I MC a lot of burlesque. And, sometimes I say that to people and they're like, oh, so you take your clothes off? I'm like, no, burlesque came out of vaudeville tradition. I just clown on stage and say funny things and whisper around and, you know, twirl my cape and make people laugh. I don't have to take my clothes off. So working with like burlesque or drag shows or magic shows, juggling shows, clown shows, whatever it is, I can sort of plug into those. And what's nice is a lot of times I'll do my slam pieces as part of the hosting. So I'm interjecting puppetry into these like sort of unsuspecting audiences. And every single time for decades, people have told me, oh, the puppet show is my favorite part. I didn't think I would like that. Like I came to see this and you showed us this and I loved it and connected to it. Like there's always someone that comes up and says that to me. That feels like a success to me. Like I measure my successes, I think, in different ways than other people do. Like my success is like going to an event and seeing everyone have fun and leave inspired or experience a new thing that they'd never experienced. It's not always like, oh, I made a ton of money on this project. And so I think that is also, you have to find a balance with that. Like you have to have a balance of like, yes, you want to make money, but also you want to create magic. And for me, I'm always more on the create magic side, make money side. Like I just want to see things happen. And now that I'm getting older, I'm also starting to want that more to shift in different ways and maybe go more into like mentoring and teaching and stuff like that than having to do so much shows. But also, I'm like, no, I have to do as many shows as I can for as long as I can. Like that's my goal, that's my drive. Because I think that's also what people want. Give the people what they want.
Speaking of puppet slams, you have a very long history with the Wham Bam Puppet Slam. Can you tell a little bit about that slam and how it started and your involvement with it?
So the Wham Bam Puppet Slam started, I believe, in 2010. And that was in collaboration with Madison J. Cripps, who is a well-known marionette artist and hilarious. I think lots of puppet people know Madison. And Valerie Meese, who now moved to the Czech Republic and is doing puppetry stuff out there. Well, we started Wham Bam Puppet Slam, me, Madison, and Valerie, and did it for a few years, and it was successful. And within those early Wham Bam Puppet Slams, that is where I developed Toybox as a character to be a host. And in those days, we would every other one we would switch. So like I would host one, Val would host one, Madison would host one, and then we'd take turns who got to host. And then those were fun times, because it was like each of us sort of had our different approaches, and mine was to create Toybox, and Val was, making these like cute little interstitial puppet skits for the in between hosting. And, Madison was, of course, just a wild card of like whatever he did, it was going to be weird and everyone's going to be like, what's going on? This is awesome. So it was fun times. And, I miss it sometimes. Like the show started that way, and then they have gone off to do their own separate life paths. And I'm still here, producing the same show and still doing the same show with, I mean, that's when it started and never stopped. And I mean, even during the pandemic, we pivoted very quickly to doing an online version of it. And people love them. And I think they're well curated and fun to watch. Yeah, we've been doing it since 2010. So I guess 14 years. And it's something I still do. We'll be doing one on Thanksgiving. We do online versions and live versions again. And it's a lot of fun. But yeah, that's where it started, was with Valerie and Madison. And so here's the interesting thing I want to say about Valerie. Val went to Japan and was learning Japanese and meeting puppetry people there. And then she went to Czech Republic and was doing the same. So the Puppet Slam Network just did this international Puppet Slam, and Valerie hosted the one in Czech Republic in Pilsen, I believe, and then had made connections also with the Japanese one. And there were these ambassadors from each places that came around and traveled to all the slams. And so we just did one in New York City, and I was the host of that, the first international puppet slam. And that's just like a really cool connection, because I feel like Valerie was very much involved in making this whole thing happen. And so in a weird way, we ended up like still working with each other within the Puppet Slam network. And it's a real thing, like the network part of it can be used in a really beautiful and magical way, and should be. It was a great show. It was smooth, and the pieces were, everyone was totally different, very well curated, and I believe it's sold out. But super cool to like see the way that the Puppet Slam world is coming together and like doing stuff and connecting.
Why do you think puppet slams are important for like beginning puppeteers, but puppeteers who are just starting on their journey?
Oh, it's super. I mean, it's super important, because Puppet Slam gives people an opportunity to create. There's less stress of like, oh, I don't have to create this whole production. I can just make this quick thing. And Puppet Slam pieces could be, I think, anywhere from like 1 to 7 minutes. It could be 30 seconds if you just got the point across. So it gives people like an easy doorway into puppetry where they can just try something out. And it could be like, oh, I'm just going to try this. And then if I like it, maybe it develops into a longer piece. Maybe it'll develop into a whole show. Who knows? Or maybe it'll be complete garbage and everyone will be like, yeah, that one was, and that's fine, because you have, most puppet slams like 10 pieces. So if there's one you didn't like, just wait 5 minutes and we'll have something else for you. And so it's great for new people of any age group, really, of young or old, that just like, oh, and I see this a lot, like someone like, oh, I want to make a cranky, or I want to make a shadow puppet show, or I could do what you just did. You just painted some cardboard. It's like, yeah. And so when I host a show, I almost always say that. I'm like, You could be up here next time. Just let me know, start making it now, start thinking about it. And I always introduce anyone in the audience to try something. And I think that makes for a good show is, people love to see that sort of, there are like sort of people that just don't understand that are like, oh, that was crap, like why did you have that? But then there's like other people that are like, oh, it was so adorable when you let that person try to do something and they tried it, like that was my favorite part. It was so heartwarming and and people do understand that. And so, it's a great place for anyone to try whatever kind of puppetry they want and give it a shot.
What do you think are the elements of like a successful a puppet slam piece?
I'll tell you. Okay, from me personally, the most successful ones are ones that are easy up and down. You are ready to go. You can set it up quick. You can do it and get off the stage. That is sort of the most important thing. And the number one thing that you should think about when making your puppet slam is like, how do I, keep it simple and like do the thing that I want to do and then get off the stage for someone else to do their thing. Because again, that to me revolves around this sort of like personal thing of like, yeah, be respectful to other people. Don't bring this thing that it's going to take you an hour to set up your stage and then move it onto this, and it doesn't fit in the space, but you made a really cool thing. So we have to look at it, but now it's taking 10 minutes to transition in between these pieces. Like, don't do that. Save that for, your own show that you have it set up or whatever. I think that's the number one thing. Having respect for everyone in the room, not just the audience, but your other performers, and keeping it easy, keeping it simple, making sure that you have everything you need to do it, because a good puppet slam piece should be able to be taken anywhere. And that's relative to what I'm saying is like, you should make your piece and then be like, okay, now I have this piece done. I could take it to my friend's living room for a party. I could take it to this club and work in this burlesque show. I could do it anywhere. I can do this like opening for a band. That's where I started. I started opening for rock bands. That's how that got ingrained in me, really, is because like I would open for bands and then they'd be like, all right, puppet show, get off the stage for the drum kit. Come on, like, what are you doing, puppet show? Like, because in those days, people just expected that I'd have some little trunk and press a button and it would all pop out and like I do it. And then it's like, no. And I was young and learning at that time too. And so I was creating more complicated things that like, then I realized like, oh yeah, I made this whole set design and all this stuff and it just got in the way. And people were angry about that. Like, I need to make this easier and more modular and more accessible. And I think that's the key to creating a good slam piece is creating something that's easy for you to perform, easy for you to break down and set up, and easy for you to travel with that you can take and has a quality that like will want to be fit in other places where it's like, hey, we're having this gallery opening and this like I don't know, string trio is going to play and we're going to have wine, but it'd be cool to have a puppet show. Could you bring something? Yeah, absolutely. Oh, but it's just on a flat ground and there's no stage lightings. Great. You're telling me bring a couple clip lamps. Okay, got it. So, yeah, I think those things more than anything are the most important things in a puppet slam piece.
My favorite puppet slam application question is always, will this leave a mess on the stage? Like that is always my favorite question because you just know someone's
Exactly.
like, it's gonna be fake blood everywhere. And you're like, oh, we have to clean this up. It's crazy.
Well, exactly that. Don't get me wrong. Some of those things that happen could be hilarious and super fun. But in my mind, I'm like, yo, you're making a puppet show. You can make your blood out of string or fabric, and that's going to be funnier and puppetier. You don't have to like add real blood. What if
Yeah.
you made puppet blood? I like that better, you know? And so there's always that. But yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about is like you have a wet show and then you have to clean it up. And then that's more work for me to like, now I have to vamp for 5 minutes in between while there's this setup. And I deal with a lot of that because I do so much variety entertainment. So like that kind of thing happens a lot in like burlesque and drag and sideshow as well, which are those are all sort of circuits that I work with often. But I'm always like, it's just it's not as good as you think it was. Like I know you thought it was good, but like, yeah, that silly string gag shooting out of that guy's nose, yeah, it was fine. Now we got silly string everywhere, and we still have half the show to do. It depends on the situation, though, too. Sometimes you could be at a show and that's perfectly fun and crazy and acceptable, but there's so many factors that make puppet blood.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned it a little bit earlier about sort of the pandemic sort of making you pivot to online. And can you talk a little bit about your experience of exploring doing these shows online? Because you really built up a great show, this What's in the Box streaming show and this thing that people loved all throughout the pandemic. So I would love to know your journey and the hardships of starting an online show.
Sure. I'm glad you asked that because I wanted to write an article for the Puppetry Journal about that. And at that time, they were like, everyone's writing that article right now. Like, can you come up with a different type of article to write for us? And I was like, no, but I really want to talk about how this happened and what we're doing. And overwhelming at that point. And everyone was sort of doing that. I think everyone had to figure that out. But for me, as soon as the pandemic was a thing and we were at home, people, of course, started to panic. And I got tons of messages from like, Toybox, oh, where are you? The world needs you. You need to make a video right now. You need to video your show and put it out right now. We need to see it. And I started telling people like, I do a live show. It's meant to be live. Every bit of it is a live show. The way that I work a crowd, the types of objects I perform with, they're not meant for video. I had to tell people like, well, I have to come up with a new thing. I can't just, no, I'm not putting my live show online. Like, I didn't want to do that. Plus, it's like all of the humor and jokes in my live shows are built on reveals. So if you're watching it, on video, it's like, oh, yeah, I saw that on video. I don't need to go see it now live. I saw it. At the same time, a lot of people that I know from the wider art community, toy makers, magicians, puppeteers, circus people, friends and family, everyone knew that I collect toys. And they were like, hey, can we send you a package? We miss you. I'm cleaning out the house. I found my old toys. You're the one they should go to. And I love you. And I'm sad I can't see you. Can I send you this stuff? And so I was like, yeah, please send me a box of toys. And so that started happening simultaneously. And then I sort of came up with the idea of like, wait, this is the show. People like these sort of unboxing shows. That's popular. That's a thing. But what if I take it one step further and sort of slyly interject puppetry into every episode so people are engaging in puppetry, and so it's a way to promote puppetry, but also make these sort of like biographical sketches of each person that's in the package. So then I'm sharing what my friends do as well, because at that time I thought everyone's losing their work, everything's going away. How do I help as many people as possible through my platform? Which that's always sort of involved in what I do. Puppet Slams is not just to promote myself, but to promote other people. I work on festivals year round every year. There's certain festivals that happen every year that I am always a part of and oftentimes curating the puppetry element of. And that's part of my work and that's part of my mission and my job is to promote the art of other people through myself as like the attention getter. Like I'm an attention getter. Like, hey, look over here. Oh, and now there's this. So that was the impetus to create What's in the Box. And then it worked. And like I was just in a show in Pittsburgh because as being America's favorite cartoon witch, it is part of my job to go to as many places in America to prove that. I was on a big tour. I usually go on one tour a year. And I was in Pittsburgh and there was an older lady there walking with a cane and just half blind. She was like, I grabbed a bunch of things off your merch table and she handed me a wad of money. At first, I was like, okay, is this how much all those things cost, or did you just give me this money? I should like do some accounting here because this is how I make a living. But then she said to me, and I just have to tell you, I discovered your show over the pandemic and it saved me. And I watched it every week and it was the thing that I looked forward to. And so I was just like, all right, you're good. Yeah, thank you. Whatever you gave me is enough,
Yeah.
And I hear that everywhere I go. Like I'll show up in Arizona or wherever, and people will tell me these things of like, your show was so important to me during this time. And I work heavily with my partner, Jennifer, on she's really the magician in that show. I'm just sitting at a table and talking. She does all the funny editing and I'll come up with like, oh, well, what if this little cartoon character or animated sprite comes in here and does something, stuff like that. But it is a big collaboration and all of the hard work that goes into it is really all her. And it became this thing, like everyone was watching it. We get like 100 viewers live every week watching in the chat and whatever. And it was building and growing. And then when the world started happening again, it was like, okay, we got a new show. Oh, my mom is watching and like our 5 diehard fans. But we spent a whole week working on this, and so it turned into sort of a thing of like, this is not sustainable. Everyone's going back to the real world. And then we got wrapped up in that as well of like people wanting me to do events and, all the regular shows and festivals that we do. We got away from it, but we never thought we would. We thought like, oh, this is a thing and people like it. We can do more of this and not have to go and open for a rock band and wait until 2 a.m. to load out, like we can just do this at home in our studio and it's fun and it's successful. And I don't know, that sort of market is really hard. It's really hard to like grab a big YouTube fan base, especially for people that are newer to the platform. It's like the people that are really successful on it have been on it for like 10, 15 years, and that's how they have these big followings every time. But if you're new, it's hard for people just to discover it. And so we've struggled with that. I mean, we want to make more shows and we're going to make more shows and we do make more shows, but not at the frequency that we were because we don't have the viewers. And it's not, it's like, oh, we're doing this free show online, but it takes us a week to make this and then it's a free thing. How do we make money? And sometimes that comes back with like merch sales and stuff, but just hasn't become a super sustainable model.
Yeah,
Um,
I have a friend who does Twitch streams, and he's always telling me, he's like, "Oh, what you got to do is stream for 4 hours a day." And I go, "I can't stream for 4 hours a day. I can't, like
yeah.
because performing, I feel it needs to be a show." And I can't just sit there and I mean, I do sit there and talk to the chat, but it's like I can only do that for so long. I can't do that for 4 hours a day to be
Yeah.
successful.
No, and that was Twitch was another thing like when everything was happening, there was a bunch of Twitch shows that we sort of met and they would have Toybox on as like a special guest, like, oh, now it's time for the Toybox segment or something. But again, I feel like that whole like Twitch thing dropped off a little bit because we went back to the real world and less people are involved in it. But many of those people that we were working with on Twitch were telling us exactly that of like, oh, you could do this and you can make tons of money and you'll have tons of fans. You need to make your own show. And we were like, oh yeah. And we actually were developing our own show. And part of that was during the pandemic, we created a game show called Take a Chance with Toybox. And I don't know if you've seen any of those, but basically the premise was Toybox was running a game show, and there'd be 3 guests. two of those guests would be like puppet friend characters, like say Toily could be a character on the show. That would be great, actually. And then another puppet character, or like a friend who is a comedian with like a Snapchat cartoon filter or something like that. But two of my friends that were funny and performers would be on. And then the third person would be a random person from the audience. So we'd have that like straight person to play off of. And the whole thing was essentially an improv game for me to sort of replace not hosting shows, because I do a lot of improv when I host shows and I love doing that. I think it keeps my mind fresh and it's when I can be creative and funny on the spot. Like I just love doing that. And so during the pandemic, I didn't have that place. And so I was like, okay, this game show. So we would go in and like, I would have nothing prepared, but we would have the categories. And so I would see the category and I'd be like, okay, I have to make up something relative to that category to ask the people. But some of the categories were easy, like make me laugh. So it was just their job to like try and make me laugh, which I would, make this like stern face and try really hard not to laugh. And so that was a really fun thing that also came out of the pandemic and was going to be developed for our Twitch channel. Like that would be the show that we could easily make 4 episodes, because I'm using, and just schedule it out. Like, okay, in the next show, Toily, we need you for 20 minutes at this time. Silly Willy, whoever it is, like Poos the puppet, like we're going to put you in at this time. And so the guests would only have a 30-minute commitment, but I could carry it. And then I'm building these hours on Twitch, which is what they require. But then the world started happening again, and we had to move it and towards the end of the pandemic, we got kicked out of our house. So that disrupted everything, as well as like staying on the like making videos in the studio, because then when we moved to the new house, it took us some months to create an active studio space that we were comfortable with, because all of our stuff was everywhere and it was in boxes and we were unpacking and figuring stuff out. And
You're gonna do Take a Chance with Toybox live, right? Next year?
no, that's relative to talk about, because that's one of the things that we did with the show, with the game show specifically, is because part of my annual process is performing in fringe festivals every year. So during the pandemic, we wanted to create a fringe festival show. So we did a lot of the ones that we wouldn't have normally done, like Cincinnati, as virtual fringe. So yeah, it is a show that like I guess could be packageable, like something like we're gonna have this episode, buy tickets, tune in, and it's like a performance where we have like two big special guests, and we promote it all like toilet paper and Poos the puppet and hosted by Toybox. Like it could be a really fun thing. And that's what we were doing with the fringe festivals, is like we did a ton of them. We did like, it was an hour-long show, so we would do 2 episodes in each hour, but a lot of times we would book different guests for each one. And a really, really one of my favorites, and I saw that was on your show, was Alex and Olmsted, Alex Vernon.
Mhm.
He really did something different on the show that was very unique and very fun. Was like, it was his 100% goal to like build new mythos in the Toy Box lore. That was all he cared about in being on the game show. He didn't care about winning the show or answering anything correctly. It was like he started to create new characters like for this Toy Box universe that would come on, and it was really funny. And he was using these cartoon filters. So at first I didn't know who he was. He called in as the live caller. And I was like, who is this? This has to be someone that we know. They're too funny, like this is great. I want, and then, being in the chat, like, hey, Saddlebags. He created a character called Saddlebags, which was like Toy Box's long lost father, who's this like dumb cowboy, basically. And so I'd be like, Saddlebags, let's talk. I want to have you back on the show. You're really good. And then I just started watching those clips more, and I was like, wait, I think I know who it is. Oh, I know who it. Oh, wow, I can't believe I didn't see that right away. But yeah, it's interesting. I was looking down the line of like all previous guests that you have on this show, and I think that I've pretty much done events or festivals or shows with almost everyone that's been on the show. Like, pretty amazing. Like that sort of stuff to me is like the best part of puppetry is the community and the people and like the family that I've made over the last, 25 years is it's like this it's just amazing family that of creative people that come from all different viewpoints and styles and stuff, but we come together and like have this really cool mutual bond that is magical, and I really cherish quite a bit.
Well, speaking of community, I wanted to say that in August of 2024, you brought Toily out to Puppet Paradise, which was the regional festival you put together in Asheville, and we just had an amazing time. And then, unfortunately, tragically, a few weeks later, the hurricane happened. And I would be remiss if I didn't ask how you were doing, and if there's in what ways can the listeners, reach out and help the people of Asheville after the hurricane.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just mind-boggling, really. I mean, it's just something that's so hard to process and put together and like be like, where do we go? What do we do? Like, how does this, what's the next phase? Like, and yeah, I don't know. I don't know, like, because community is a big part of my annual process. And working locally, there's, you know, several festivals in town that I work closely with, the Asheville Fringe Festival, Leaf Festival, Surreal Circus, The Big Secret, like these big festivals and community-based projects that aren't not maybe necessarily the things that everyone sees me doing, because they see me at puppet festivals and other things, but those are the things that I do year round. And do all those come back? Like for example, there's a festival I did called Tour de Fat that's at New Belgium Brewery, and the brewery is right next to the river, so it's destroyed. And that is really mind-boggling to me because our town is a tourist town and most of the tourists come here for beer. Why do we have good beer? Because we have good water. And now that we have all of this tainted water and problems with water supply due to the flood and the hurricane, what happens there? Like, New Belgium's a big brewery and they know that their factory now is in a dangerous place. Do they just leave Asheville? Well, then all of the jobs of the people that work there are gone. And then that tourist trade is gone. Well, the people that work there in the tourist trade is what funds arts and entertainment. And so if there's less people for that, like it just is going to exponentially have effects based on like water. And I really don't know. Like we're still at a place where like, what do we do? Well, I guess we just keep trying to do the things that we've always done. And, I just went on this big tour, but before the tour, I had multiple events where people are just like, Toybox, we need you at this benefit. Toybox, we need you to come and play with these kids and do a theater game. Toybox, please come and do this. It was amazing. I think it was amazing to see our community rally and mobilize so quickly. And people were there to help each other and still are in such a big way that was like, impactful and like serious. And and that was amazing. Like, this is an amazing thing happened to my, because then the hurricane happened. We had lost phone. We didn't have phone or internet, so there was no way to like communicate with anyone. And we didn't know like if you could drive down the road, is the road going to fall in? Are there trees in the way? Like, can you even get out? Will there be gas? Is everything destroyed everywhere? All of these sort of concerns. And then I had already booked this big tour, and so I was really only in town for about a week after communication came back. And then I left and went on this tour that I just came back from because I didn't, and I don't know the state of like what things are going to be locally. I better go out and do this big tour because that's might be the last money I make for a little while, you know. These are big events. I can't say no to them. But amazing thing happened when I went to Philadelphia and through a fellow puppeteer, Maisie O'Brien, she was in one of the slams I did. Well, she was in two slams that I did on my tour. And she was like, hey, come over to this community puppet build we're going to have. It's for a giant puppet show and parade. You can meet some local puppet people. And I'm like, that sounds awesome. I'm totally there. I want to go help you guys build giant puppets. And we're in this warehouse building, these giant puppets. And I noticed there was four people from Asheville there. Two of them were my friends, but one was just a random person that came up to me and was like, "Wait, you're Toybox, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." Like they said, "Oh, I used to go see your shows at Sly Grog. Like, I love your stuff, I'm like, I live in Philly now, but the community of Asheville were like in force at another community helping them, and that was just like really beautiful and powerful to me. I was just like, yes, the people of Asheville are so resilient and like doing good things, and it's a really good community. And I believe that it will come back, but it's going to look different. It's going to look different, and that's undeniable. There's no other way. Because there are places, entire places that are gone that just don't that were places that existed that are now nothing. And a big one was the River Arts District, and that was where we had multiple venues for our Fringe Festival. And the Fringe Festival is something that I've been a part of since 2009, and is a big deal for our life because my partner is also one of the directors of the Fringe Festival. So like we're really invested in it, and we lost half our venues, and so now we're like, where do we go? What do we do? How do we fix this or pivot so that it makes sense and is respectful to the community and to everything that's happening and going on? All of those sort of things are really questions and concerns that I think everyone in the arts community has right now.
Well, I'll talk to you about perhaps there's a link we could put in the show notes or something where people are able to support or something. They can send some funds that way.
Yeah, I know like Beloved Asheville is one that a lot of people are supporting, which is a group that helps homeless people, which right now there's tons of homeless people. I mean, there's tons of homes that are gone, and that were underwater, that were like carried away. I mean, I'm sure everyone's seen these videos and stuff, and it's a real thing. And, for us, like we sort of have, because of who I am and what I do, like we typically have touring artists staying with us. And so our studio does have several like guest quarters for people who are on tour and have, companies or whatever. So after the storm, we pivoted very quickly to like who needs a house, and essentially strangers that just like saw the post. It was like, hey, who needs support, who needs a home, and through friends of friends, whatever, contacted us and were like, yeah, my house is gone. And so, who knows how long that's gonna happen? Like how there's so many people just without homes. There's places still without water. There's communities that are like a week or two behind what's happening here in Asheville. There's whole communities that are like, they still haven't, really dealt with because they're isolated and in the mountains. And that was the biggest problem, is the topography of the region, is because you have all these mountains, you have all these mountain roads, and so a lot of them collapsed. A lot of the bridges, when that water rushed through, the bridges are gone, and so then that bridge led to a whole little subdivision where people live. Now they're cut off and their houses were underwater, in some cases. So I can't even really, like, you would need like some sort of systematic thing to look at, to be like a map with like, here's where all, I don't even know, like here's all the people that are severely affected, here's the people that are moderately affected. Because luckily where we live, we were moderately affected. I mean, our downtown definitely was destroyed and is still destroyed, But our subdivision and our house is luckily on a little hill and positioned in the right way that there wasn't a landslide. And so we're very fortunate to not have any damage. We got our resources back here fairly quickly. We lucked out in that way, but a lot of people just aren't that lucky.
Well, we're certainly, as I said, it was we were only there for a short time, but we loved every second of being there, and so we're thinking of everybody there, and thank you for all the things you do in the community out there, and we will help when and where we can, all the way from out here in California. I do like to wrap up every interview by asking this question: What has been the highlight of your puppetry career so far?
There's a few. It's hard to like name one, but every time that if I am directing a festival and it's a successful festival, those are always highlights for me. I really have to think about it, but there was one particular moment that to me is a real highlight of. So I produced puppetry at this festival called Leaf. It's the Lake Eden Arts Festival. It's a music and arts festival here in Black Mountain near Asheville. Anyone can go that's listening to it, and it happens 2 times a year, and it's camping and there's all sorts of like bands. Some of them are big name bands and activities like circus shows and fire shows and contra dances and poetry slams. And I do the puppetry for the event along with another company called Street Creature, who do more processional parade style stuff, large scale stuff. There was one Leaf Festival. Usually what we do is we do a kid show and a grown-up show, and they're both sort of slam format. I know some sticklers about puppet slams don't like to say that you can't have a kids slams for adults, so I don't call it a children's showcase or something. We were having our kid show, and I came out and I emceed, and I was just like, hey everybody, do you guys know who I am? And there's this one little kid, and he raised his hand, and I was like, yeah, you right there. And he just kind of said, you're the best person in the whole world. And I was like, oh man, buddy, you are the winner. Come on up. I'm going to give you a prize. And this kid started walking up, and he stretched out his arms, kind of walking like a mummy, and walked up to me and gave me a big hug. And every single kid in the audience, when they saw that kid do that, somehow were clued like, oh, it's okay to just go and give him a hug. So literally every child in the audience got up and like cuddle puddled me. And I mean, it was literally, I looked like there was no kids left. Like every kid was like, oh, we're going to do this. It's okay to do this. Like, let's do it. And they were hugging each other and just like this huge group hug. And that to me is one of the best moments that was like, I felt like a success. I mean, those kind of things are the things that to me, another highlight was we did a show at the Detroit Institute of Art, and it's this like, do you know, are you familiar with it?
I've heard of it, yeah.
It's like their big art museum in Detroit, and it has all of like the classics and the masters and stuff. And we performed our show in this room painted by Diego Rivera, which is like magnificent. It's like these like 20, 30-foot tall murals on every wall. And we performed in that room, and then when we weren't doing our show, they had it on display in this room, like a room away from like Van Gogh and Picasso. Like our art was on display in this. And so it was like, wow, I made it as an artist, like I'm a real art. I'm a room away from Picasso, like, and Van Gogh. Like this is amazing. So that was another highlight for me. I mean, I could probably think of a million stories, but those are two really big ones.
Fantastic. Well, Keith, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show, and thank you for all your work. And I look forward to seeing you again in person soon.
Absolutely. It was great talking to you. Thanks for having me on the show.
Many thanks to Keith Shubert for being on the show. For links to some of the things we discussed, check out the show notes for this episode, episode number 102, over at underthepuppet.com. And if you'd like to hear even more of my talk with Keith Shubert, it's available to the bonus content and above patrons over at patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Under the Puppet. I want to send a special thank you out to all of the Saturday Morning Media Patreon patrons who help make this show possible. Patreon patrons at the producer level and above who get a special shout out are Eve Cunning, Kathy Crawford, Tony Urbano, Brandy, David Akers, Paul, Scott Armstrong, Vicky Sebring, Ricky Chavez, Karina, Jeff Toro, and Lee Thompson. To become a patron, visit patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media. And thank you for your support. If you have questions, suggestions, or feedback about the show, send them via email to underthepuppet@gmail.com, or you can connect with the show on Instagram or Facebook by searching for Under the Puppet. And don't forget to tell a friend about the show. This episode featured music by Dan Ring and was expertly edited by Steven Staver. Thank you so much for listening. Under the Puppet is copyright 2024 Saturday Morning Media Grant Pachoco executive producer. All rights reserved. www.saturdaymorningmedia.com.
Under the Puppet proudly presents The Adventures of Timmy the Tooth Reunion. In this almost 90-minute video, you will hear great stories from the cast and crew who brought this amazing puppet show to life. Plus, you'll see never-before-seen artwork and exclusive behind-the-scenes video. Under the Puppet's Timmy the Tooth Reunion is available right now at timmy.underthepuppet.com.
You've been listening to Saturday Morning Media. Stay tuned, we'll be right back.